And before we start today's lecture, just wanted to brush up, sort of do a recap on what we have covered so far. So the model is principles of economics, and we focused more on microeconomic aspects. And we discussed what is meant by the term economics, and we talked about why economics is a scientific study, because it's a social science and it uses scientific techniques to study human decision-making behavior in the face of human decision-making behavior in the face of scarce resources, right? Or by definition, it's how individuals and societies make decisions about ways to use scarce resources to fulfill wants and needs. And then we talked about the two broad disciplines of economics, micro and macro. So micro is the study of small entities in the economy, households and firms, and macroeconomics is the study of the bigger picture, right? For example, we looked at the individual decision-making behavior of the consumers and the producers, and both these entities, when the products, goods and services come into the market, we'll talk about aggregate supply and aggregate demand, growth, unemployment, exchange, and if there's another party involved, like the international community, then we talk about exchange rates, deficits. And so all those macroeconomic variables are discussed under macroeconomics, and GDP and so on. Then, yeah. And then we talked about the three economic questions: what, how, and for whom to produce goods and services, and scarcity. And we saw that the scarcity leads to a trade-off, because if there are several options, and if you can go for only one option because of scarcity, that is called trade-off. And trade-off leads to another very important concept in economics, and we call that opportunity cost, right? It's a cost of the next best choice, the next best alternative. It's actually the cost of the foregone benefit, right? If you have two options, if you pick one, the cost of the foregone benefit, or the benefit that you have to give up. Then the four factors of production in economics: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And using these factors of production, firms or the economy produces goods and services which are consumed by the consumers. And depending on who owns these factors of production and who answers these three key questions, there are the economic systems in the world. And we looked at four key economic systems: the traditional economy, then the command economy, which is one extreme, and the capitalist economy, and the mixed economy, which you will see characteristics of both the command economy and the capitalistic economy, or the market economy. Right, and we looked at Karl Marx very briefly, because he is one of the greatest economists, and his book Das Kapital led to a lot of revolutions, which were focused on moving from capitalistic economies towards socialism and ultimately communism. Right? And then Adam Smith is father of economics, and he wrote the book called The Wealth of Nations, which talked about how the government should stay out of business and let the market forces, the demand and supply forces, determine the price in the market. So that's sort of the gist of the theory. Then we looked at the two entities in the market, two key entities: the demand or the consumers side and the producer side. So under demand theory, we looked at factors affecting demand, and we said that we could, if you really want to model the demand or estimate the demand for a particular good, then you can do that by using a demand function. So it's a mathematical model you collect data and estimate this function to understand the impact of the variables or factors that affect demand and the magnitude, by how much, right? And demand schedule, we saw that price quantity is a negative relationship for normal goods. When price increases, quantity decreases. But at the same time, there are other types of goods which we didn't discuss, like given goods or luxury goods, where as price increase, demand could increase, but for a normal good, we say there's a negative relationship. So, and we also wanted to see why humans, or why we pay less as the price increases. And to understand that, we looked at utility. So utility, there are two schools of thought: cardinal utility and ordinal utility. Cardinal, we said that we could assign a number called utils, the unit, and measure the relative utility, or you could order the utility and estimate the utility of a good or a service. And to understand that better, we discussed an example where we had a numerical example where we were looking at what happened to utility as you consume good 1 unit at a time. And we looked at total utility of consumption and the marginal utility. So marginal or marginal, the term marginal is very important because it looks at the additional utility that you get as you increase the consumption of 1 extra unit, the product. And this is the total utility, marginal utility figure. And you can see when the total utility is at its maximum, this peak point there, the marginal utility is 0. So totally, the marginal utility actually is the change in the total utility to a change in the number of glasses or change in the quantity. So therefore, the slope of the total utility is marginal utility, or in other words, marginal utility is the slope of the total utility function. Right? And then we wanted to derive the demand curve from the utility curve. And we saw that if something is given free, then the consumer can go up to its maximum total satisfaction or utility, right? This point here. Yeah. Otherwise, the time, that's when it's free, but if it's priced, then to find that point mathematically or algebraically, we would use this function called marginal utility equals the unit price of that product. So that we could see as the price increases, the point that we can maximize our satisfaction will move down. Therefore, we could derive the function where as price increases, the quantity demanded decreases. So that was the demand curve, right? And then there's a law underpinning that theory. It's called the utility gain from, it's called law of diminishing marginal utility, which means that as you consume more and more units of a product, the marginal or the additional utility will gradually reduce, right? Right, that was when you consume one product. Now, what would happen if you consume 2 products at a time? We could denote that or show that using an indifference curve. Why is it called indifference curve? Because it shows bundles, commodity bundles. Yeah, commodity bundles. That gives you the same level of utility, can it? Combination bundle them products දෙකක් තියෙනවා, bread and rice consume කරනවා. If no matter what, or irrespective of what you consume, the bundles that you consume, you will get the same level of utility if you are on this line or if you're on this curve. It's called an indifference curve, meaning you are indifferent. There's no difference of the utility. Whichever you consume, this one and this one, or any of the bundles, you will still get the same level of utility. So as a consumer, you would want to push this curve up and up and increase your satisfaction or utility as a rational consumer. But the problem is we are constrained by two key things. One is our budget and the other is market prices. So we wanted to include those constraints and our wishes together. We have wishes, which is shown by the indifference curve. This is how much we want to eat or consume. This is our budget line. And if you put both those two together, our wishes and the budget, then we can find the optimum point of consumption. And we saw that at this point, the two curves or the lines are tangent to each other, and we know that algebraically or mathematically, when two curves or two lines are tangent to each other, the slope of these curves equate, right? So the slope of this curve, which is the marginal rate of substitution, equals price ratio. So price of bread and price of rice. Right, and then we looked at how factors affect the demand, different factors. Its own price will change along the demand curve. So this might be an MCQ question, for example. If its own price changes, it changes along the demand curve. All other factors are called demand shifters. For example, cross prices, substitute prices, complement prices, these things change. It will shift the demand curve. All that. And then we looked at income. Depending on how much you spend on consuming goods and services, they are categorized into three types: inferior, normal, and luxury. If your demand increases if your demand decreases as your income increases, then that type of goods are called inferior. The others could be normal or luxury goods. Then elasticity of demand is very important to understand the quantity or quantify the relationship between the factors or the demand determinants and the quantity demanded, right? So we did a few calculations to see how responsive our demand is when certain factors change. For example, if with age does demand change? When your price increases, how much of an impact does that have on the quantity demanded? Right? Income 10% really value quantity demanded kocharakin aduveda. Right? So we could do that using elasticity formula. And then we looked at the producer side, the supply side. Right? So the theory is very similar. There are factors that affect supply, right? But for a consumer, the ultimate objective is to maximize utility, right? So you would want the prices to reduce as much as possible, whereas the suppliers would want the prices to increase. So these two forces in the market will determine the price in an ideal market without any artificial intervention. Right? Supply, they would want to. They like it if the prices increase. So there's a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied. And we could model this relationship also using a supply function, just like a demand function. And you can use statistical models, statistical packages, run this model and estimate the supply. Right? So this is a supply curve. Same axis, price and quantity. But here we see a positive relationship. Again, except for its own price, any other factor will shift the supply curve, right, in the short run. Right. Then the market equilibrium, price and quantity, right? We saw what could happen if prices increase. There will be excess supply. If prices decrease, there will be a shortage. And we looked at the tax, how a tax could affect the equilibrium, price and quantity. Then we looked at theory of firm, or what happens inside a firm and how decisions are made in a little more detail. Now, this is the first one is factor-product relationship. Under factor-product relationship, we looked at the production function. We saw how we could model the factors affecting quantity, and we can also estimate the magnitude or the size of the impact, right? Numerically, we can do that using numbers. If you collect data for these factors, like on the left-hand side, you find the output or the yield. On the right-hand side, you have several variables that affect quantity, right? And then you model that. If you take one factor at a time, one input and one output, you will see this type of a typical graph for biological relationships like crops and livestock or aquaculture production. And then we looked at a numerical example where we could derive the total product, and from that we could find the marginal product and the average product. Now these are important because to make decisions, we would want to find, for example, if you're looking at efficiency of a farm, right? If you want to estimate efficiency of a farm, you would want to find the efficiency parameters like the average product, for example, right? Labor product unit input output, right? So there are certain packages to estimate the relationships, like tailor-made packages or customized packages to estimate efficiency. And using those, you can find efficiency of farms. You can even compare them. You could, simulate and see what would happen if you increase the inputs by this much. What would happen if the climate change factors change, climatic factors change. So those things also can be done. Then you find the marginal and average product. And this is a typical generic graph, but just to understand the theory behind this. And so you can see that the total product will increase as you increase the fertilizer level. Total product increases, comes to a maximum, and then decreases. The average and the marginal products will also increase and reaches a maximum, and then they become, they decrease with addition of more inputs. But you can see here again, if things are given free, if fertilizer or any input, labor or whatever is free, then the producer can easily move up to the maximum yield. But if it's priced, then you have to come up, decide on an optimum point. We did that by using this function. The price of fertilizer equals marginal product times price of output, right? Times, this is cross, times. And when you do that, you can see as prices change, this point will shift, right? So prices will determine the optimum amount to use and also the corresponding optimum yield that you will get. Because these are the constraints that the producer will face, isn't it? So this is the input price. This is the input price, and this is the output price. Then factor-factor relationship. So under factor-factor relationship, it's very similar to the indifference curve, isn't it? Because there we looked at the consumption of two products and The consumption of two products, in the indifference curve showed us the consumption of two products that gives us the same, or that gives the same level of utility. But here we're looking at the use of two inputs that would give us the same level of quantity or output. So it's called an isoquant, or same quantity or same output curve. So that's this is what you see here is an isoquant that gives you the same level of output using different level inputs. One level selling input combinations use කරත් එකම output එකක් ලැබෙනවා නම් ඒකට අපි කියනවා isoquant කියලා. Right, isoquant. So this one is called isoquant, and if you plot several on the same graph, it's called an isoquant map. Right. So just like a consumer, a producer, but because for a producer, the ultimate objective is to maximize profit, right? So the producer would also want to push the quantity or production up as much as possible, but he too is constrained by two constraints. One is the budget, and the other are input prices. So we could model that constraint because we know the wishes. Ape wish එක තමයි producer කෙනෙක් විදිහට increase output. Ape constraint they are the budget and the prices. So if you put both the constraints and the wishes on the same graph, then we are able to find the cost minimizing input bundles. So why cost minimizing? Because to maximize profit, you would want to maximize revenue and minimize cost. And since we are talking about inputs, we are looking at cost minimizing input bundles. Right. Then the third relationship was product-product relationship. Like I said, it's a very important concept in economics. And this shows us what? Said that this curve shows us the most efficient products. If you produce more than one product in your firm or in the economy, and whatever is inside will be, you can still produce them, but not efficient. So as a country or as a firm, you would want to meet or push your production up until this efficient point. And this point there, the red dot, is not achievable given the current resources, because we draw this graph assuming that the technology is fixed. Your resource endowment or resources, or the resources that you have in the country or with the firm are fixed, right? And given those resources and current technology, these are the efficient points. But if you can improve your technology, if you can improve your resources, get more land, train your labor, and if you can, you will be able to push this forward and reach a higher level of production and efficiency. Right, so we discussed that. And then we looked at the theory of cost, which is very important for a lot of decisions, like to find cost minimizing, input bundles, output bundles. Then in your pricing strategies, you will have heard of average cost pricing, marginal cost pricing, cost plus pricing. So to make decisions in terms of pricing, it's important to understand the cost. So we looked at two types of costs, variable and fixed costs. And we said in the short run of a firm, you find both the fixed cost and a variable cost. Variable cost will vary with the output. Now, this is the output. Our cost of the firm will vary. Now, F stands for function, meaning it varies with cost. The cost of the firm varies with the level of output, right? So if it depends on the output, that is called variable cost. And if it does not depend on the output, that is called a fixed cost, right? So in the short run, there are variable inputs and fixed inputs. Therefore, we see both types of costs in the short run, but in the long run, we say all inputs become variable. Therefore, in the long run, you will only find variable inputs, right? So total cost is a function of the total fixed cost and the total variable cost. Okay. So if I draw this on a graph, you can see that the variable cost depends on the output. For example, if I want to produce more of a crop, I will have to use more fertilizer. Now, fertilizer pramane වැඩි කරන්න වෙනවා, crop එක වැඩි කරන්න ඕන. Now, මගේ cost එක crop එක මත dependent, output එක මත dependent. So that is called a fixed cost, variable cost. But the fixed cost will not vary with the output. Right? For example, I maybe have just one machine and I can't buy more machines in that season, harvest or whatever. So that will not depend on the level of output. So that cost is fixed. No matter how much output you increase, your fixed cost will be fixed. So fixed make ekatu fixed cost plus variable cost make ekatu tamai total cost, right? So that's what you see here. So therefore this difference is the fixed cost. Right. So what do you say here? Now average, we could derive different types of costs using the total cost function, because we know the total cost depends on the level of output of Q at the output. This is Q. Q must depend on variable cost, fixed cost, marginal average variable cost, average fixed cost, average total cost, and marginal cost could be derived from this total cost. Right? So last week using these numbers. Right. So what else can we see here? Now, a firm is interested in, of course, pricing the product so that you can maximize your profit. So if you want to maximize profit and if you want to price your product, the unit price of a product will have to be less than more than the cost, isn't it? The price that you sell the product at, price of the product should be greater than the unit price or unit cost of that product. The firm will price the product above this point. Above this point, doesn't it? Price එක හැම වෙලේම මේ average cost එක minimum වෙන point එකනේ මේක. එහෙනම් ඊට වඩා price එක වැඩි වෙන්න ඕනේ හැම වෙලේම product. Okay? So if you එකක price එක ගත්තොත්, right? At this price, this firm can sell this amount of quantity. So if you plot this on a graph with price on this axis and Q on this axis, the marginal cost curve will reflect the supply curve of the firm, right? So now we are familiar with supply curve because in the very first lecture we looked at the supply curve, and this is the marginal cost reflects the supply curve. It's actually an inverse relationship, but we could say that it sort of reflects the supply curve of the firm, right? So that's why it's important to derive these functions using the total cost. And when you do, also look at how pricing strategies, costs will vary in certain market structures. So we looked at 4 types of market structures. On one extreme, we looked at perfect competition, or we call it perfectly competitive market. So the name itself gives us a clue that it's perfectly competitive, right? There are price takers. There are so many competitors, or there are so many sellers in the industry that nobody can decide. I mean, you can decide, but if you vary the price, then you will have to suffer consequences and you will not get the same profits, because in this type of a market, we say that you cannot make abnormal or supernormal profits. So in a perfect competition, what the market will decide, the industry decides as a group, that you will have to sell your product at the same price. Right. Then we looked at the other side, at the other end of the spectrum, the continuum, where you find monopoly has the highest market power. Why does it have highest market power? And may from type perfect competition market එක තමයි අඩුම market power එකක් තියෙන්නේ, වැඩිම market power තියෙන්නේ monopoly. Why? Monopoly, there's only one firm, right? If you are the only firm, then you can do whatever you want with your products and pricing, right? As long as people are willing to pay for your product, you can vary your price as you wish. Then we looked at monopolistic competition, where there is a lot of, lots of sellers in the market, but not as many as in a perfectly competitive market. There's still competition, but because there are lots of substitutes, so the market could be quite inelastic because there are lots of substitutes. I'm sorry, quite elastic, but if කෙනෙක් හරි වැඩි කරොත් වෙන firm එකකට යන්න පුළුවන්. Therefore, rather than price competition, they compete with non-price competitive strategies like buy one get one free, or giving a better service, promoting their product, better advertising tactics. Those things you can see a lot in this type of market. Okay, now where will you then price the product? That we discussed, or how will they decide on how much to produce to maximize their profit? We say that a firm would maximize the profit where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. එකකින් වැඩිපුර ලැබෙන revenue එක ඒ වැඩිපුර produce කරන එකකට යන cost එකට සමාන වෙන තැනදී marginal revenue okay, marginal total revenue you can find by multiplying price of what the product එකක මිල quantity එක වැඩි කරලා අපේ total revenue එක හොයාගන්න පුළුවන්. මේක අපිට මේකෙන් marginal revenue හොයාගන්න පුළුවන්, just like we did in the cost function. Total cost එකෙන් අපිට marginal cost එක හොයාගත්තා වගේ. You equate these two and then you will find the optimum quantity to produce. ඊට පස්සේ අපි දැක්කා කොහොමද ඒක demand curve එකට line එක extend කරලා price එක decide කරන්න කියලා. Right? So that theory can be applied to all other imperfectly competitive markets. Perfect competitive market එක අපි first කතා කරපු market එක හැරෙන්න, all other types of markets are imperfectly competitive markets, right? There's no perfect competition, they are imperfect competitive. Okay. Then we looked at oligopoly. We said that these types of market, in this type of a market, you find few firms, but they're relatively large sellers with high market share, and so you might see things like collusion, price fixing in this type of market. Again, optimum product found profit maximization happens where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And this is actually a summary of the structures. So if you want to explain the nature of an industry or characteristics of an industry, you will look at the number of firms, the freedom to enter and exit, nature of the product, whether it's homogeneous, differentiated, what type. Like in the case of an oligopoly, you would see a lot of firms would look at what others do. There's rivalry in that type of markets. So, and it's very easy to enter a perfect competitive market, and then thereafter the restrictions increase. And we saw that the shape of the demand curve, which is actually kinked, not a straight demand curve, but a kinked demand curve, because the shape depends on the rival, or they look at what others do, and accordingly they will price their products. Right. So in an imperfectly competitive market, like in a monopoly, for example, where the company or the firm can, the business can determine or vary the price as they wish, you will see what we call as price discrimination, right? So you will come across this term in other modules related to marketing, for example. So price discrimination is the act of charging different prices to different consumers in order to capture consumer surplus, isn't it? So we looked at consumer surplus in the first day. Like, for example, there's a market price. This is the demand for a product. Let's say this is any product. Yeah. And there's, let's say now this is the demand for mango, and there's a market price for mango, right? This is the market price, is how much you pay. So you can see the consumers, some consumers are willing to pay this much. Demand function එකෙන් අපිට පෙන්නන්නේ එක quantities වලට කොච්චර pay කරන්න කැමතිද එහෙනම් මේ quantity එකට people are willing to pay this much, right? But the market price is actually this amount. Then my quantity එක අපි ගත්තු. People are willing to pay, let's say, 100 rupees, but the market price would be 50, right? So you can see people are willing to pay more for this product, but people actually pay less, right? In the market. එහෙමනම් price discrimination, right? So there's a request to explain the columns of that table. Let's very quickly go through that again. So we said last week that we can characterize a market using these characteristics. When you categorize a market or an industry, rather, we look at these characteristics. First one is number of firms. How many firms are there? For example, if we take perfect competition, we know there are so many, hundreds, thousands or more people in a market. That type of market is a perfect competitive market, a perfectly competitive market. So if there's only one, it's a monopoly. Now, number of firms, how many firms are there in this type of market? So accordingly, we can decide which type of a market it is, right? If you take the dairy industry or the fresh milk industry, that would fall under perfect competition because there are so many sellers in that market, right? But if you take something like petroleum or gas in Sri Lanka, what type of a market will that fall into? So you look at how many firms are there in the market. So if it's 2, 3 or 4 or 5, accordingly, or if it's 2, you can categorize under oligopoly, but it's also called a duopoly. So that would fall under this market structure. Then freedom to enter. Freedom of entry, meaning we said that it's very difficult to enter certain types of markets for different reasons. Like sometimes the cost of production or the principal investment could be very, very high, like in the airline industry. And it's very difficult to enter, or it's impossible to enter this type of a market. For example, pure monopoly. Okay, it could be that either the investment is very high, the principal cost is very, very high, or it could be that it is based on some technical monopoly. Patent එකක් තියෙන pharmaceutical company එකක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. Copyrights තියෙන හින්දා වෙන්න පුළුවන්. Software producing company එකක් න. So restrictions are there. අපි කැමති කෙනෙකුට enter වෙන්න බෑ. So that's a monopoly. So take a spectrum එකකට continuum එකක් කියලා කිව්වා. ඒකෙන් restrictions අඩු වෙගෙන යනවා උඩට යනකොට දැන් perfect competition එක easily anyone can enter and also exit, right? Restrictions අඩුයි ඒක නිසා කැමති ලාවක යන්න එන්න පුළුවන් කෙනෙක් තමයි මේකෙන් කියන්නේ. Then there's a lot of transparent information. I mean, if there's transparent information, like in the case of the dairy industry, you can get pricing on production, information on production of dairy products. You can easily find sellers and buyers. You can easily find prices. So information is also quite transparent, but as you move down, the transparency reduces. They're less and less transparent. Like for example, monopoly more restricted, less transparent, and pure money monopoly very, very restricted. You might not have any information on production, maybe. Right? So nature of product, homogeneous, differentiated, undifferentiated to unique products. We know that in a perfectly competitive market, you find very homogeneous products. You take paddy, very homogeneous, isn't it? I mean, there are different varieties and so on, but more or less homogeneous, substitutable. Therefore, but as you move up down to monopoly, there's only one product and that's unique. There are no substitutes usually. So it's a monopoly. Right, so we looked at this last week. So if you want, the recording will be up for you to go through. We said that the demand curve for this type of a firm, individual firm, is horizontal because it's a price taker. Whatever is decided by the industry sellers like decide kind of market taker, sellers and buyers, that price may price taker තමයි may market taker sell කරන්න. So the rest of the demand curves are downward sloping, like a typical demand curve, but only in the case of an oligopoly, you will see a kink demand curve. Right? We discussed this last week, so it's all there in the recording and the slides. Right, so we were talking about price discrimination. Now, so this imperfectly competitive markets are looking to discriminate price because they want to capture the consumer surplus, right? Like I said, there's a market price, but they know that people might be willing to pay more for that product, so they want to capture. So accordingly, there are 3 types of discriminatory categories. First is first degree, then second and third degree. So what do we mean by first degree price discrimination? Here, these firms are trying to capture maximum willingness to pay, right? For example, you would see this in an auction, right? You start with the lowest bid, like let's say 100 rupees, and then there's a buyer for that, or there could be several, or then they do go up to about 150, 200. Likewise, you know what, how an auction works, right? Bids work. So you increase the bids because there are people who are willing to pay more, but for the same good. There may එකම good එකට තමයි වැඩිපුර prices කැමති වෙන්නේ, you know. You take the bid up because people are willing to pay that price. You know, එකම quantity, එකම good එකට people are paying more. So that's discrimination, isn't it? So you can capture the highest amount that they are willing to pay. Now you will see this in online marketing, online purchasing also. You create an account and you keep doing this for you keep ordering online or purchasing online for a long time, then your purchasing behavior can be monitored by the firm, and then they know that, you know, you are willing to pay more for this product. So you will keep getting offers, nudging to purchase in that range, right? So that is called first stage of price discrimination. Same product, but if somebody is willing to pay more, then they are trying to capture that surplus the consumers are willing to pay. Second degree is called excess capacity pricing. So can you think of any examples? So it says excess capacity pricing. It's based on quantity. For example, selling at a discount price after a certain number of goods are purchased. So you might say this, if I take an example, the airline industry, right, or the movie tickets or theater tickets. Right, for example, let's say the economy class, and all the tickets, if you pay in advance, then you might buy at a cheaper price. And as you get closer to the departure date, if there are still seats remaining, then the prices will go up, right? So it works both ways, actually. You will see both types of discrimination, first and second degree at times. Sometimes if you pay early, you might have a higher price. So depending on the demand, towards the date of the departure, the prices might even go down. So in that case, the people who buy closer to the departure date, you might pay less, right? So, but the same seat, right? The only thing is you might not be able to choose where to sit or to get a better seating location with leg space and all that, but you're paying the same amount, different amount for the same good, same seat. It's economic class, same service, but you're paying a different price. So that's called discrimination, right? Because that happened because there's excess capacity, isn't it? Excess capacity. So they would either put the price up or down if there's more seats available, because they still want to cover the fixed cost, isn't it? So third degree price discrimination is so same product, but different segments of the society pay different prices. For example, you would say, senior citizens and students paying less for certain products, and the others pay a normal price, like train tickets or bus passes, or deals in restaurants. You would see, like, students get certain offers, but the same product you pay less. So that's one group pays less than the other. So that's again discrimination. You are discriminating among different segments in the society, right? And you see peak and off-peak discrimination, isn't it? Same product, but for example, if you take the train tickets, so there are two. So you get peak time tickets and off-peak. So the morning until from 7 to 9 is peak time. So the train ticket prices will be quite high. But from, let's say, 11 to 1 or after 9 to 11 or 12, it would be off-peak. So what's the difference? I mean, same seats, same class, but you're paying a different price in the morning during off-peak times, because they know that at that time it's if you want to get to office on the train, the company knows that you are willing to pay any price, even a higher price, for the same product, right? Because you have to get to work on the train, so they will charge the highest amount that you're willing to pay. So the prices, the train ticket prices would be high for the same product, but different prices in the morning. But off-peak, you'll be paying less. Same happens, or same goes for internet service packages, right? Peak and off-peak times. Yeah, so that's called discrimination. So you can see this in imperfectly imperative markets. Right. So that sort of covers the key theories or principles in microeconomics. And before we move to today's lecture, today we'll be looking at some applications. We will look at a few model questions that you could expect during your exam or MCQ test. Right. Before that, do you have any questions? Right, so if you have any questions, we can discuss now. So here you have like 20 questions on this on the screen, but this is also available on LMS. I've uploaded the same document on LMS. So if I'll give you some time, you can log into LMS and download the document and work on it, and then we will discuss the answers. Okay. So you will, for the exam, you will get MCQ questions. Each question will have like 4 answers, and you will only have to select one, the correct answer. I will give you sufficient time to complete. The only thing is that you are only allowed one attempt. So once you start, you can't start over. You'll have to finish the exam. Otherwise, whatever is done automatically submitted, because you have done a few tests. I'm sure you are familiar with this whole setup. And yes, not sure the dates when it's going to be. So you'll have to talk to your academic coordinator. Okay, so I'll give you some time to work on this. Like I said, it's also available on LMS. Okay. now. Right, so you don't have to upload this to LMS, the answers. These are just model questions that we will discuss in the class. But like I said, you will have to do the test. So the questions will be very similar, but these questions are sort of based on the first day lessons that we covered on the first day. But you get similar questions from the rest of the lectures also. Okay, let's take one by one. First question is the capability of a commodity to satisfy human wants. So what's the term that we use to show or define the capability of a commodity to satisfy human wants? Can someone give me the answer in the chat box at least? Right. So consumption, yes. But when you see the word satisfy, we know we're talking about satisfaction, isn't it? That's called utility. So the answer is B, utility. Question number 2, the additional utility derived from the consumption of an additional unit of commodity is called what? So when you see the word additional, you know what we're talking about, isn't it? What's the answer? Very good. Marginal utility. Correct. So C, 3. What's the law that defines the demand curve to slope downward? So we went through this morning also. It's the law that defines demand curve to slope down, meaning why does it slope down? Because of diminishing marginal returns, isn't it? As we consume more and more, the marginal utility that you get reduces gradually. That's called the law of diminishing marginal returns. 4. How do we calculate marginal utility? Answers, please. Yes, I can see a few answers. So how do we calculate marginal utility? So it's talking about this. So you have total utility, and if we have Q on this side, we saw that the total utility function increases, comes to a maximum and decreases. And we could also plot the marginal utility. What was marginal utility? Marginal utility is the utility that you get, additional utility you get if you increase total utility by 1 unit. Sorry, quantity by 1 unit. එකක් වැඩිපුර consume කරොත් ලැබෙන වැඩිපුර ලැබෙන මුළු utility එක. That's called marginal utility. Therefore, marginal utility is the slope of the total utility function, and if you plot that on the same graph, you will see that when total utility is a maximum, the marginal utility becomes 0. Now this is the marginal utility. Mu is marginal utility. And so how would you calculate marginal utility? Marginal utility is said change. Now this little triangle is delta, meaning small change. Total utility. Change in the total utility to a change in what? Quantity. Quantity එකකින් වැඩි කරනකොට වැඩි කර ලැබෙන utility. Right? So what's the answer then? Tu over Q. Right? It's all there in the on your slides. Right. Question 5, marginal utility. Okay, now you can see this on the graph. What happens to marginal utility? What would be the answer? Very good. It can be positive. So on this part, it's positive. Here, after this point, it's negative, and at this point, it's 0. So it can be positive, negative, or 0. Then for the maximums, so feel free to stop me if you need to, if you want me to clarify that again or explain that again. For the maximum satisfaction of consumer, what's the answer for this one? We said that if something is free, you can go up to total utility maximum point. But if that good or commodity is price එකක් තියෙනවා now, how would you find that point? It's the point where the marginal utility equals price. Right? Price එකට marginal utility සමාන වෙන point එකේදී. So what would be the answer? The marginal utility of a good should be equal to price.
Recording in progress.
And then, why is the consumer spending restricted? Why? Because we want to maximize utility, but because of the budget, our spending is restricted. So after reaching the saturation point, consumption of the additional units of commodity was what? After reaching the consumption saturation point, which is this point, what happens? You could see that the total utility falls and the marginal utility becomes negative, isn't it? Total utility function marginal utility function negative. This part is positive and this part is negative. Question number 10. So we saw that consumption of a free good if it's not priced, ඕනම commodity එකක් free නම්, we said that the total utility derived can be maximized. Right? Otherwise, once it's priced, we use this function to find the optimum point. Question 11. The curve derived by joining bundles which give equal level of satisfaction. What was this called? What was the graph that gave us, let's say, bundle 1 or good 1 and good 2? What was this called? Different bundles, it gives the same level of satisfaction. Any answers? Yes, good. Indifference curve. Well, so according to the indifference curve, at the equilibrium, we saw that the slope of the indifference curve, slope of the indifference curve equals slope of the budget line. And number 13, the slope of the indifference curve is called marginal rate of substitution. So we didn't go into detail on marginal rate of substitution, so you might not expect any questions on the slope. An indifference curve lays right of another indifference curve results in what? So indifference curve, and we said that as you move up from the origin, the utility increases, isn't it? Like this is 5, this would be 10, 20, likewise 50, 100. So we can see an indifference curve lays right of another indifference curve results in greater utility or greater satisfaction. Satisfaction, very satisfaction. A set of ICs drawn in a graph is called what? We said it's called indifference curve, but if you draw several, it's called a map, indifference map. The difference between microeconomics and macro is micro studies the effects of this one, isn't it? Microeconomics studies decisions of individuals, whereas in macroeconomics you study the entire national economy or the bigger picture. Which is not considered a key question in economics. We know the key questions are what, to produce, how, and for whom. So this would be the question that's not listed under the 3. The concept of laissez-faire, or what it means is government should stay out of business, was introduced by which economist? The father of economics, Adam Smith. The loss of value of the next best choice defines a concept of what? Answers? Opportunity cost. next best alternative or next best choice. The value of the next best choice is called opportunity cost. Right. I think this, of course, we did. So all of the following categories are factors of production except what? Land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship are the factors. So the answer is B, money. Right. So like I said, now this is more focused on what we covered on the first day. So you might not get a lot of questions on utility and demand, but you will get questions on demand curve shifts, supply curve, production function. Like for example, you might get a question like this one here. So how would you answer this question? What's the answer? The curve derived by joining all input bundles which give equal level of output. What did we call this curve? Remember, it was very similar to this curve. What did we call this? The isoquant, doesn't it? The answer is isoquant. So go through the slides again. And how would you calculate the marginal product? So how did you calculate the marginal utility? This total utility over the change in Q. Marginal product would be total product, change in total product over change in input. If input is X, then marginal cost, if you can remember, is change in the total cost over change in output, isn't it? So, and there will be questions from market structures. For example, what type of a market will have the highest market power, right? So that would be monopoly. Or what type of market will have the highest number of sellers? That would be what? The perfectly competitive market. Yeah, so that type of questions we can expect for the exam. Anything that you want to discuss or you want me to clarify? So go through the graphs, these calculations. You will not get calculations to do, but you will have to be familiar with sort of the demand function, what factors can shift the demand up and down, market equilibrium exchange and factors. Now it's all there in your slides, right? Okay, 20 and 21. Question number 20, the curve derived by joining all bundles which give the same level of satisfaction. Okay, what it means is all bundles which give the equal level of satisfaction. What did we call? You can remember. It's this one, isn't it? Indifference curve. Different bundles, but same level of satisfaction. Question number 21 was about factors of production. I think we discussed that in the first day. These are the factors of production: land, labor, capital, and management. So money is not included in the list. I mean, it does come under one of the key, it's called financial capital, but it's not a category of factor of production, right? Right, so if that's clear, then I think we can go to today's slides. Right, so now we'll talk about some applications of what we have learned. So we said there are two broad areas, and under which there are some sub areas. So food economics is something that agriculturists specialize in, economics of agri-food industry, right? So when you talk about agricultural economics or food economics, what are we interested in? We are trying to, or we try to apply the economic principles that you have been learning over these 2 weeks to understand how the food industry works, agriculture industry works, and how you could improve the industry and make certain decisions when it comes to what production, food and agri-food production, marketing, distribution, and demand, consumption, isn't it? Consumption, supply, and distribution mainly, right? So in the food industry particularly, you are interested in understanding the economics of food safety, food quality, and food security. So these are three very categorically different terms. What do we mean by the term food security? Best term, right? Food security. සිංහලෙන් කිව්වොත් අපි කියන ආහාර සුරක්ෂිතතාවය කියලානේ. Security කියලා කියන්නේ. එතකොට there are four dimensions that sort of underpins or that the food security is made up of, right? There are four dimensions. Food secure කියලා කියන්නේ නම් first thing, now food security can be measured at household level. But the individual කෙනෙක්ගේ food security බලන්න පුළුවන්. household එක, right? ගෙදරක food security. That's the smallest unit that we would consider. Or we can actually look at the province-wise, like the provincial food security, country's food security, or regional, like South Asia, South America, Africa. Likewise, regionally, we can look at food security. Right. So if you are to be food secure, there are four dimensions that we look at. One is availability. We try to look at whether food is available to everybody, or that household or that individual. Right? It should be available. Eggs, butter, vegetables, whatever the food, it should be available. It could be in a roadside shop, or it could be in a supermarket. It could be anywhere. It should be available for you to purchase, right? If it's not there, then it affects the level of food security. Availability and accessibility. Accessibility is it's available, but if you can't go and get it, it's not accessible, right? Echo, you have to go and get it, right? Purchase it, or you should be able to get it to your doorstep, or you should be able to find it from your household. Home gardening, accessible window. And you have to have the purchasing power. But if it's priced, then you should be able to, should be accessible, right? Then, so now you can remember during the COVID period, there was a huge impact on food security because some lot of food is not available. Some lot, even if it's available, you can't go and get it. So that affects the food security. Third dimension is utility. Or utilization, utilization. So utilization is you should be able to utilize it properly in the sense you should know how to store the products properly, food, and consume, how to cook so that you preserve the nutritional quality of the food, right? Food security, nutritional security, that comes under food security, right? The utilization is important. And the fourth one is continuity, or stability. All three will be there. Food available, any food, right? Food is available. You are able to access it. You know how to utilize it properly. But if it's not stable or continuous, for example, in certain livelihood groups, farmers, season harvest season, the food security levels are high, but thereafter the food security levels will go down because sometimes in some seasons, if they don't get a good harvest, they don't have money, affordability is less. Therefore, that affects the continuity. To be food secure, all these four dimensions should be fulfilled. Making that affects food security. Food security, and we call it food insecure now, right? We know what we are going through these days. We don't have money to purchase, or even if we have money, the products are not there. So now our food security levels have gone down because of these issues, right? So global organizations such as the United Nations, Food and Agriculture organizations, they are continuously monitoring what happens to certain regions, to certain countries in terms of food security, because it's a basic human right, and there will be aid or support given by looking at how we are progressing in terms of food security. So that is food security. We are not going to go into detail in food security, but we will look at a little bit on food safety and quality, right? Food safety and quality is also very important in the food industry. And if you look at the industry as a whole, it's an ever-growing industry, isn't it? So despite what has been happening over the year, the COVID pandemic situation, even through COVID, food industry was developing, more businesses were coming up, more online businesses came up, and there was more, even now there are more job opportunities coming up in the food industry. But we can expect, like even with the crisis, there will still be opportunities in the industry because it's an ever-growing industry. There are lots more opportunities in the global community for international trade. So we also are interested in identifying how this industry is changing, right? One is it will change with the population. Population is ever growing, and certain parts of the world you will see that you see more senior citizens because of the age population would be greater in certain parts. And if there are more, then there'll be more focus on health, healthy products, healthy options. So that will be another sort of an industry. There'll be niche industries created under which then, because of increase of life expectancy, and improvement in level of education, people will demand different things, healthier products, convenient products, and so on. Urbanization can have an impact. So these are again something similar to what we discussed in the first day in terms of demand. So the food industry will continuously have to monitor the structural changes, how demography change, and accordingly will have to cater the demand, and the supply will also be decided on how these things will vary. So some of the consumer trends that you would see today is more safety. People are more concerned on safety, especially in the developed world. Even now, I mean, we look for products with the high nutritional quality. There was a trend, hype about organic products. Then, products with functional foods, micronutrients. So health benefits are very much in focus these days. So that brings us to certification, isn't it? Quality certificates are important. So that's something the food industry will have to look into or can expect. Then corporate social responsibility of the industry. Social media, there's a lot of campaigns, advertisements, articles on nutritional value of certain products, and also new businesses coming up on social media. Lots of new innovations of products, value-added products coming into the market. Convenience is also very important. And then we talk about sustainability and eco-labeling. Now, this is also a concern because for economists, because in countries, especially in the developing world, you see a lot of what we call as greenwashing, right? Greenwashing. What we mean by greenwashing is you see, if you go to the supermarket and you look at any type of product, be it consumable or not, especially in food products, you see labels saying that these are organic products, so 100% natural, 100% organic. But can we really trust these labels? Who would verify or authenticate them? Like, how can you validate the authenticity of these labels? So that greenwashing, green product, organic, natural product, it's not really what they say. We are paying more because we know that organic products, for example, are expensive. So you're paying more for something which is not true. So that's called greenwashing. So now, today, the Ministry of Environment is trying to create an eco-labeling framework for several industries so that, to build the trust. So people, if you want, you can verify the authenticity of these labels. And so you won't pay more for something fake, something that is not true. So we just looked at some. So you can see a lot of these trends in the global market compared to the developing world. For example, in the developed countries, you see a lot of there are formally registered companies in the food processing sector. People are more interested in buying branded products. And if there are any faults, defects, health hazards, food products are being recalled, which you don't see in the developing countries much. So, so I hope you had a chance to go through this slide. So there's a difference in high income versus low income countries or economies. So when it comes to food quality and safety, this is made up of 4 pillars. I mean, there should be a policy for food safety and policy for each country, and there should be a scientific process to determine the quality and safety of the product, and that should be certified in certain certifications, HACCP or ISO or SLSI standards. Then there should be a law to be so that there should be a law and regulations enforced. So whoever does that do not comply with these standards will be fined or sued or will have to suffer the consequences. Right. So what's the difference between safety and quality? Safety is a binary factor. The food is either safe or not. Right. There's no continuum. It's either safe or not. Quality is actually it's a bit subjective, and there are like a spectrum or a continuum where the perception of quality, my perception, it might be different from your perception. So there are different attributes that sort of outlines the quality of a product. It could be the appearance, the color, flavor, texture. So different quality attributes will determine the quality of a product, right? And there's a difference between quality assurance and quality control. What do we mean by quality assurance? Is you assure the quality of a product from start to end, from the time you source inputs until the end. Difference, for example, if you have certification like HACCP or GMP, Good Manufacturing Practices, that indicates that the entire process from where you find the inputs to the final product, the entire process is assured for its quality, right? But quality control actually deals with the end product, where you look at, how many defects are there, what are the reasons for these defects, where you focus on the final product. If there are 100 units produced, there are 5 defective products. That quality control deals with that. So there are tools that we use for quality control, like histograms, cause and effect diagrams, or fishbone diagrams. For example, if you find that there's a percentage of defective products, then the entire group would sit together, and it could be different divisions from the company, and then we talk about what went wrong. And that's called a fishbone diagram. So these are some of the tools that you can use for quality control. Right. So as from an economic point of view, we are also interested in studying food quality. Right. So what, in your mind or in your idea, what defines food quality for you? So these are some of the factors that would decide or determine the quality of a product, isn't it? Whether there are any foodborne diseases or animal-related diseases, we call them zoonotic diseases. That there are any food scandals, something that happened recently with adulteration, mixing water with milk, or what happened with the coconut oil issue and SLSI. So there's a famous food economist called Caswell, and she has come up with this is a very famous or widely used model that we can use to estimate the food quality of a product. Right? So there are several categories under Caswell's classification. So food quality can be determined by food safety, nutrition, where, if the label says that this product, let's say it's a cordial, and this cordial, or it's a milk powder. This milk powder includes these nutrients, and that product will have to, if you do a lab test, that product will have to have those nutrients. And taste, appearance, right? Size will have to comply with the standards. So let's take an example. Now, if you take milk powder, so in the first column, you see the food quality attributes, and the second column, you can see how you can actually quantify whether complies with the standards. Or, for example, if this packet says 75 grams, here, so if the packet says 75 grams, it will have to have that weight, right? And if it includes these flavors, then it will have to have those flavors. Likewise, you can measure the quality of the product. Right, so food industry or agri-food industry is an industry where we see a lot of misinformation or asymmetric or unbalanced information. Right. So if you are to learn about the quality of a product, we say we learn the quality using 3 types of attributes. One is called search attributes, where the consumers can determine the product quality by looking at the product, right? If you go to the market, or if you go to a supermarket, or if you go to a bakery, buy a loaf of bread, if you usually buy every day from the same bakery, and if the color has changed today, then you know that there is a problem with quality, right? If it's a bit more burnt or if the size is different, by looking at it, you can know about the quality of the product. So those are called search attributes. The second type is called experience attributes, meaning the consumer cannot determine the product quality until you buy and consume it. For example, taste, right? Let's say those flavored milk cartons, small ones, or fruit juice bottles. Unless you taste it, you can't say anything about the quality. If you have been buying the same brand for some time, you know the quality of it. But if the taste is different, if you feel that it's spoiled, then there's a problem with the quality. So those are called experience attributes. You have to consume to determine the quality. The third one is the most crucial one, credence attributes. Consumers cannot judge the quality even by consumption. Right? Can you think of examples? For example, pesticide use, right? Now, let's say now tea, there's a maximum residue limit, isn't it? MRL limit. But, okay, the label would say, okay, now this complies with these standards, but unless you do a lab test, right, in the local market, how can we determine the quality of the standards, the quality of the product? Even if you consume it, you cannot say, right? You can't distinguish between whether this has actually used organic fertilizer or whether this complies with the maximum residue limits. So these are called credence attributes, right? 100% organic keyword, natural keyword. You cannot test it by consumption. So these attributes create lots of problems that the food economists and economists are interested in. So why? Because of asymmetric information. Right, so information is very important in economics or for the economy. Problems, or we say markets, fail if there are asymmetric information. What do we mean by asymmetric or imbalanced, or if this information is not the same for all parties? For example, market, right? So there are buyers and sellers in the market. So we know if you sellers usually have more if you take a supermarket, the sellers or the grocery, the seller has more information than the buyer, right? ඒගොල්ලෝ date එක වෙනස් කරලා expiry date එක විකුණුවත් අපිට ඒක consume කරනකන් සමහරවිට හොයාගන්න බැරි වෙනවා. That's because the seller has more information. Seller knows where it was produced, how it was produced, but the buyer has very little information. අපිට information ගන්න පුළුවන් එකම විදිය ගොඩක් වෙලාවට label එකේ. Right? So we should be able to trust the label. So trust is also very important, and we see a lot of studies on trust and information economics. Right? So coming back to asymmetric information. So in an ideal market, like in the perfectly competitive market that we discussed, we said that there is transparent and perfect information. Right? But we know in the real world it's not. There are lots of imperfect competition. Therefore, we see asymmetric information in the market. Right, so let's take a few examples. Like in the medical sector, we know that the hospital or the doctors have more information than us when it comes to ailments or sicknesses. Right? If you fall sick, you have to trust the doctor because the doctor is qualified with an MBBS degree to prescribe medicine and diagnose your problem. But so one party has more information than the other party. Now, a party with very poor information now because we don't have the same degree, we don't know how to diagnose the problem, so we have less information. So if the hospital asks us to take, whatever the tests or whatever the medicine that they prescribe, then we will have to buy them. Right? Sometimes we might be paying more for something that's not needed because of information. So if there was some way that you could actually verify, then the market would be better off. Right? Nobody is paying more. Nobody's cost is more. Nobody is worse off than the other party. Insurance, if we know there's an insurance firm and you go to buy insurance from the firm, let's say life insurance. I mean, if there's no medical checkup done, even if there's medical checkup done, if the company asks you questions like, if you have your family had any illnesses, diabetes, heart attacks, and if you lie, then they will still have to believe you if there's no way of verifying what you are saying. Right? And then you purchase this insurance claim and you end up with a heart attack in the very near future, then that is a burden for the company. That's a cost to the company, isn't it? If everybody lies, right, life insurance, vehicle insurance, that's going to lead to market failure. Therefore, they have come up with certain verification methods to verify whether these claims are true or not. So used cars, we'll talk about that in a little while. So imperfect information can lead to market failure. So it's important to identify, especially you will see a lot of misinformation or imperfect information in the agri-food sector. Right, so we divide this type of information asymmetry into two types, moral hazard and adverse selection. What is the difference? Difference depends on the time, the information asymmetry at the time of entering into the contract. Okay, let's see an example. Now take moral hazard. Information is symmetric before the contract and asymmetric after the contract. So this is also called hidden action. Right? Hidden action. Okay, now take this example. Now let's say there's a job interview. There's a vacancy in a firm. Right? So the interviewer is there and all of you are going for this interview. There are about 90 of you in the class and all of you will take the same diploma certificate, right? Diploma in Agriculture and Plantation Management. So you get the certificate from a Commonwealth University. So it sort of complies with the Sri Lanka qualifications framework, the number of credits and so on. So when the company sees that this take a certificate, it gives them an idea. Now you have followed these subjects and you have completed these credits and you've successfully taken the test assessment and got the degree. So all of you have the same standard qualification, isn't it? So all 90 will go to the interview, but only one person will be selected. Now, at the time of entering into the contract, or where you have the interview, you have symmetric information, because of the degree certificate, or sorry, the diploma certificate, the interviewer has the same, you and the interviewer has the same level of information, because the interviewer can verify your qualification. But once you enter into the contract, the interviewer selects one person out of the lot, and once you are selected, your inner motives, hidden action plays out, right? Maybe although you have the same degree certificate, you are not competent enough. You are a lazy person. You don't, you ignore work, or you don't, you're not a good team player. You create conflicts. Therefore, your hidden actions play out, right? So that's the example of moral hazard. And that's going to be a cost to the company, right? So we see a lot of moral hazard in salesman efforts. Salespersons come with different types of products to your doorstep, and they say, this product is just this and that, lots of features. But once you start using it, you pay for it, you purchase it, and you're using it, and you see that doesn't really do what it's supposed to do, right? Medical industry is the same. Drive faster insurance, for example, like in the case of vehicle insurance, let's say you want to get a vehicle insurance and you are a reckless driver, but you claim to be a very safe driver. You say, I drive safe, I park in a very safe area, and you get the insurance. So the insurance firm will believe you. And once you get the insurance, now that you have the insurance, you might drive fast, you might, drive recklessly, or you might park it in an unsafe area. So if that happens, that's going to be a cost to the firm, right? If everybody does the same, that's going to be a cost for the firm. So that's moral hazard, where hidden action plays out after you enter into the contract. But adverse selection is where there's information asymmetry even before you enter into the contract. Right, let's take an example. A classic example that you would see in textbooks of economics is the market for lemons, right? So we call it the market for lemons. The second-hand car industry, it's called market for lemons because there are, let's say, there are two types of cars in the second-hand car market. Car market, okay, used cars. This good quality cars, high quality cars. The other would be low quality cars, right? So high quality cars are called plums, right? High and low. Plums high quality cars. Other ones are called lemons, right? So if both these types of cars are in the same market, right? And if there's no way of verifying, right? Let's say the car market will have to sell all the cars on average, or each car will be sold at 1,000 rupees. So both high and low quality cars will have to sell at this price if there's no way to verify, right? Test verification method, they will have to come down to this price. So what would happen now? Once you purchase, you pay the same price even for a low quality car, and then the buyer will be in trouble. So, and the high quality car owners will not want to sell at this price. So what would happen is these high quality cars will leave the market, and it will only have lemons left. And the lemons can do whatever they want because there are only lemons in the market. They can artificially, vary the prices. And with time, this market will collapse, and that would lead to, we call it market failure, right? So if there are no verification method or then to check the quality, that is going to create market failure. So that's the idea behind asymmetric information. So therefore, the industry, especially the food agriculture industry, is trying to develop techniques or methods to verify the quality. For example, signaling, advertisement, labeling is very, very important to build trust and reputation of the consumers, right? Branding, certification to ensure that the quality is maintained. And so here there are lots of labels. So in the coming years, there'll be a bit lot more stricter. For example, if you have a fair trade certificate, that implies that you not only have quality products, but you also, as a firm, is interested in the welfare of the people, right? The welfare of the people that work for your employees, their families have a good life condition, so a standard of life. So therefore, labeling is also very important in maintaining quality. And that also reduces the transaction cost of the firm. Now, transaction cost in a firm means the cost of searching, negotiation, and entering into contracts. So if you are a firm, you have, you do B2C or business to end consumer sales or B2B. So to do that, if you have to search for consumers every time, if you have to search for sellers every time, then that's a cost. So this will also be reduced through these strategies. So cost of transaction can be reduced in the long run. Right. So we know that, having, for example, quality assurance or quality certification in a firm can be very costly in the short run. But why would a firm want to do this? Right. So drivers, what factors that drive the firm, anyone, to do something in economics is called economic incentives. Right. For example, why would a firm want to adopt a quality certificate? Right? Why, as a person, would you want to protect the forest near you, the beach near you? Why would the government want to protect the beaches in the country? Why would a factory or for a company want to protect its environment? So these are called economic incentives. Right? If you talk about quality, let's take an example. Now, food quality certificate like ISO, let's say 21,000 or 20 or 19,000. Why would you want to adopt this certification or certificate in the firm? Because it's very costly. You have to, you might have to purchase new equipment. You will have to train your employees. You will have to keep records. You will have to have auditors coming regularly to check whether you comply with the standards. It'll make a little cost. Right? So why would you want to do something that is costly? And those drivers, those motives, those reasons are called economic incentives. So there are two types of economic incentives for a firm or for anyone. One is called carrots, right? Carrots. The other is called stick, right? What's the difference? We know why you would use a carrot, right? So if you show a carrot to the rabbit, what happens? Now, you can incentivize somebody with a carrot. Right? So it's sort of a way of enticing somebody with a carrot. So that person will move towards or push themselves towards that particular action. Right? I'll take an example. The other one is stick. Stick, you take a stick and you pass it on stick. If you don't comply, then the government can fine you, right? So you would do something because of these two reasons mainly. One is you have some benefits of doing it, and we call them market-based incentives, right? අපි quality assurance certificate එකක් ගත්තත් අපි හිතමු අපි adopt කරා කියලා HACCP or ISO certificate එකක් ගන්නවා certification එකක්. So we do this because in the long run I know it's going to reduce my cost of the firm. මගේ efficiency එක වැඩි කරනවා. ඒක labor efficiency නැත්නම් input use efficiency එක වැඩි කරන හින්දා වෙනවා. because everything is recorded in place. The human resource efficiency වැඩි sales and revenue වැඩි the reputation, people would say, okay, now this is an ISO company, so we don't have to worry about purchasing from him. And commercial pressure, media, people who live around my company are pressuring me to sort of, dispose my waste properly, limit my emissions. Therefore, there's pressure from the external environment. So these are market-based incentives. Nobody is fining me. I will not suffer consequences, but I do because of the benefits that I get. So those are called market-based incentives. Regulation. Now that's a stick. The government will make certain things mandatory. Government, food industry, agriculture industry, firms, agribusinesses will have to adopt ISO 1000. That's a mandatory requirement. If you don't do that, you can get fined, you can get sued, or you will end up in jail, right? So therefore, rules, regulations, laws are all sticks. When a benefit it's called carrots or market-based incentives. Reasons it could be because of altruism. Right? Altruism, meaning it's not because of carrot. But I have a monetary benefit, financial benefit, government mandatory requirement rule regulation, but it's purely out of altruism, right? Out of good faith. Good faith, right? You do it because, for example, if I produce food, if I have a food producing company, I produce food, quality, healthy, nutritious food, because I have a I care about the people, I care about the environment. So I do it not for any benefits, but only because I care about something, right? So that's called altruism. So these are all economic incentives. Right. So these are also important because we know that when it comes to international trade, we talk about two types of barriers to trade. One is called tariff barriers, right? Taxes on international trade is called tariffs. So tariff that affects the traded. The other is called non-tariff barriers, right? Non-tariff barrier quality standards. So, for example, certain countries such as the EU might ask us to have certain standard. Otherwise, they will not allow us to send our goods to the European Union, right? So that can be a non-tariff barrier. So therefore, it's important for us to have these quality certifications in place, right? So I won't go into much detail on that then. So how, now we looked at principles of economics, but how would you do an actual estimation? So if you are a student of economics, or if you are an economist, you would want to know, do certain analysis to, we said on the first day that economics is we make objective decisions, right? Objective inferences. So to do that, you follow certain scientific methodologies. So there are several types of analysis that you can do. For example, a simple analysis is a sensor testing in terms of food quality. If you want to analyze the quality of a product, or if you, let's say your firm produces a new value-added product. So you produce a new type of tea, right? A flavored tea. So if you want to do a market analysis, or if you want to test your product before it goes to the market, you might do sensory testing. You might get a group of people, like 30 to 60 people, podi group for a sensory test. So podi group මේ වගේ table එකක් matrix එකක් හදලා we have appearance, texture, smell, and then you have a Likert scale, right? So now scale is where you give a rating. Let's say kendra 10ට අපි කියනවා rate කරන්න කියලා, right? And somebody might say 10, another person might give it an 8, right? 7. Now you analyze this and you can get an idea of the quality of the product, right? Sensory quality. Then another very widely used tool is questionnaires, right? So questionnaires for social science research, for economic research, you use questionnaires a lot. Now, from a questionnaire, you can collect data. Now, when it comes to data, there are two types, isn't it? Data, primary data and secondary data. Primary data, you collect directly from your respondents using a questionnaire. So you make a questionnaire on what you want to analyze. For example, if you want to do a demand analysis, you might want to find how much they consume at different prices, their age, their education level, their gender, their marital status, their taste preferences, income, and so on. You will collect using a questionnaire. The second type is secondary data, where you use reports, central bank reports, time series analysis time series analysis tapi අවුරුදු 20ක 30ක 50ක data ගන්න පුළුවන් from World Bank data or central bank data or census and statistics department reports. And we will get data on prices, goods, quantity of goods, income, how income has changed over the years, people's income, expenditure data, So these we can take and do analysis to look at how demand supply has changed. You can even forecast into the future, right? Climate data, rainfall data, all these modeled using certain statistical methods. And also there's another method called structural equation modeling, for example, that we use. Now, certain data types, for example, if you want to look at demand depends on what? Price data you can easily find. Demand also depends on age, right? Now age data is also you can easily find category. But what about their perception on organic products? Perception organic products education level perception. Now this you cannot give a number, right? Perception number that's a qualitative latent variable. In that case, we will give statements reflecting their level of education or their perception, their attitude. So those are qualitative variables, right? So that also can be included in the model with other numerical variables, right? So you can use techniques such as structural equation modeling to do that. So there's so many other models, but some common methods that you might want to look at when you do economic analysis. Right, so I think this we roughly, very briefly discussed last time, how you would determine demand. You collect data for different variables, and using a model, you can estimate this relationship, the demand function. You can do the same for supply function and production function and so on. Right. Okay.
Recording stopped.
Right. So do you have any questions from what we have discussed so far? Right. So if there are no questions, I think we can stop the lecture today. But like I said, there will be a test. So when you start going through the slides, if you find anything difficult or if you need explanations, please feel free to call me and I'll be happy to help you out. Right? Right. So I think in that case, we will stop the lecture. Right. So the date, I'm not sure. I don't really know the date, but please talk to Dr. Guru K, who's your academic coordinator, and she will let you know. I think you should get it, should have it probably next week or the week after. Right? Quiz will basically be from the first two lectures, right? First 2 weeks. And so you might expect like maybe one question from today's lecture, but mostly from what we have covered in the first 2 weeks, because today we discussed applications. So yeah. Any other questions? Right. So in that case, we will wrap up. And okay, thanks for attending the lectures and all the best. Okay.